Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Fadi Zafari. I will be moderating the session today. I am a research associate at CIGA, Center of Islam and Global Affairs, at Sabahattin Zaim University. I would like to welcome all of you to CIGA Ramadan webinar series. Today is the 16th of Ramadan, and we have a distinguished professor from Turkey, Professor Dr. Albert Salam Ashekgenç. He received his PhD from the University of Chicago in 1983, and he was teaching for a long time at Middle East Technical University in Ankara, as well as also at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. He is retired from Yildiz Technical University in Istanbul, and he is working now at both Üsküdar University as well as Ibn Khaldun University. His title, the topic of his talk today is the Epistemological and Sociological Function of Philosophy. Hujam, I am very happy to see you again, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am glad to be here also. So I'm going to start now, I suppose.
Yes, go.
The topic is already announced as the epistemological and sociological function of philosophy. This is, I think, an important topic. I actually reached this topic through my experience when I was teaching philosophy. Usually my students, when they were taking philosophy, after second or third year, they get confused and they are thinking, what am I doing? Why did I come to this department? Why am I studying philosophy? What is its use? Such questions are raised depending on the level of thinking, actually, because you see, the same questions, for example, are not raised in respect to other sciences. Let us say, no one will question what is the use of medicine or medical science, what is the use of civil engineering, and what is the use of physics, chemistry, biology, and so on. But when it comes to many social sciences, if not all, and human sciences, and above all philosophy, they question, what is its use? What are we going to do with this thing? The reason is, the effects of other sciences, such as medical science, physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, and so on, are clearly visible, in the society or in any other area. People look around, they know what it is used for. Why they know? Because the effects of those sciences address our senses, namely through sense perception, we can see their effects, and then we can tell, what they are used for. When it comes to philosophy and also to other social and human sciences, their effects are not so much visible to the senses. Of course, people will say, I am studying philosophy because I am so curious about the questions that are studied in philosophy. This is possible. I just like it, I just want to talk about human nature, the use of discussing knowledge, and many other things that they come across in philosophical discussions. But this is something different. what we are questioning is something above that. Of course, by curiosity, people can study anything they want to. They want to question certain things, and they want to come up with answers to those issues. However, we need to question this, fundamentally. Try to go into the main issues. Is philosophy actually, useful for something? But probably you noticed I didn't just say epistemological, because you see, when we analyze, as we will be doing shortly, we will see that philosophy is useful for other sciences in the epistemological sense, to develop their theories, to question, elaborate, and analyze, and so on. They need certain concepts, and these concepts are elaborated in philosophy and especially in logic. So they can see this and then just say, okay, epistemologically it is useful, maybe as a method in sciences we can use. But you see, I want to emphasize its sociological function, namely that it has a certain function to perform in society as well, just like other sciences. But we cannot see that. So that means we need to analyze. We need to analyze and try to see this. As you probably see on the slide, I tried to explain this on the basis of modes of thinking. Though I call it levels of thinking, but actually these are certain modes of thinking that every human being in her life we experience. So it is at the third level, namely the abstract level, abstract mode of thinking, that we realize the significance of philosophy and other social and human sciences. The reason I bring this into the attention of especially Muslims, because in the Muslim countries, you probably noticed that those especially who study these sciences, they will ask, why are you studying this? Why not engineering? Why not say aviation? Because it's more useful today for Muslims. Why don't you study certain areas in chemistry? Because look, we need today we have an epidemic, and we try to find a solution for this, and you are spending your time talking about things that we don't even understand. So you probably come up, you face these questions, and they don't realize, the background, the actually, the foundation, which gives, a strength to those sciences, which is coming from these social, human, and philosophical sciences. So for this reason, I am bringing this. Of course, all sciences are important. I'm not saying that philosophy is above all sciences. It is more important than any other science because of its function. As far as sciences are concerned in general, they are all important, and therefore they should not be neglected. But you see, unfortunately, today in the Muslim world, there are some sciences like philosophy. They say we don't need, and in fact, in many Muslim countries, they don't even have philosophy departments in the universities, which is one of the most significant sciences, in fact. And that is what I will try to explain this here. But I will, approach the subject from a bit different perspective, and I hope this will not confuse you. I am saying something like this. Actually, I use old ideas in a strange way, and I put them into a strange perspective to emphasize, and maybe, so that it will be more visible for us. Now, number one, you probably noticed when I was speaking, I consider philosophy, a discipline among the sciences. Now, at the moment, I try to avoid to use the term science. But you see, if you study history of philosophy very well, you will see that almost until the 20th century, and I would say again, just to be on the safe side, I am saying almost all philosophers consider philosophy to be a science. You see, the problem is, unfortunately, the definitions of philosophy in the past, given, in relation to its methodology. I mean, you take like Al-Kindi's, Ibn Sina's, Al-Farabi's, Al-Ghazali's, and even later on certain Muslim philosophers, as well as philosophers in Western tradition. They take it, of course, from Aristotle primarily, and they always try to give a definition, that to understand the nature of things in the true sense, as they are, as far as possible for human, ability. So this is more or less the same. It is a science that is trying to understand the true nature of things. Well, this is not so bad, of course, but you see, to the true nature of things is given as the subject of study in philosophy, but this is not correct. Why? Because this is done in any other sciences, and it doesn't distinguish science from any other science, whereas sciences are distinguished from each other on the basis of their subject matter. Why? Because just a bit later I will mention this again, because you see, science in general is studying being, and this tradition actually comes correctly from Aristotle. For the first time, he developed this approach, and he said that the subject matter of sciences is being. Now, if you take science in general, being in general, they correspond to each other. On the one side, we human beings trying to use scientific method to understand being. But you see, being, when it is studied in general, Aristotle said that this belongs to theology, theologia, as he said in Greek language. Later on, we came up with another term, metaphysics, to call this. But you see, then there are many, parts of being. So each part, but these parts are not, you cut something, in a haphazard way, and then start studying it. There is a logical classification of being, and each science is studying one class of being, so specific sciences. But you see, philosophy is not like that. Maybe philosophy took the position of metaphysics, in a different way. So this means that we need to reconsider our understanding of science first. So I'm not going to, to discuss this in detail, but my approach, I have worked on this quite a lot. I spent many years trying to come up with a definition of science, and my approach was that let me try to find the most basic characteristics of science. It's too difficult to define science. Why? Because you see, science is not only an organized body of knowledge, which most philosophers use in their definition, because it is also an activity, and there are many scientists involved in this activity, which now they call scientific community. So as a result, we need to consider all these, characteristics of science. And I try to, classify this under 4 headings, as you can see here: subject matter, method, theories, and accumulated knowledge. So these are all mentioned by previous philosophers. I am not inventing these. Many different philosophers, they utilize these. However, I am adding one more thing, scientific consciousness. Now, scientific consciousness is actually, historically, when something, an area develops in this way, the scholars, they notice that this subject matter actually makes up a specific area of study, which can be defined as a specific science, and then as a result of this, they give a name to it. So therefore, there is no science without a name. But this scientific consciousness obviously does not belong to the science or sciences. It belongs to us. It is in fact a characteristic of our knowledge system. So as a result, we stamp a name, and that name becomes a concept. So therefore, unites all the issues, methodologies, theories that are accumulated in the science, and therefore it makes it easy for us to refer to that as a science. So when we consider this, I came up with this definition. Science is an organized body of knowledge named through scientific consciousness as a result of investigating a well-defined subject matter with a certain methodology, leading to accumulation of theories and scientific knowledge. So just a brief explanation you see underneath. Science is a genus. Each science is a species under it. This means that we distinguish each science from other species based on their subject matters. So therefore, subject matter is very important. By the name concept of subject matter, we are not referring to the issues and problems discussed in a science. Why? Because if you try to define a science on the basis of the issues discussed in it, you can never exhaust counting the issues. So as a result, you need a very universal concept to give as a subject matter for each science. One example, Aristotle, I believe he is the first one who has done this, who had done this in human history. Say, for example, when he talks about physics, he says its subject matter is nature, finished. So you see just one concept, nature. But you see, then nature is either organic or inorganic. So that means physics must be divided into two. So the organic is studied in biology. As a result, biology becomes a subdivision of physics, and so on. So this is the way he continued, okay? So that is what we need. So if this is the case, and remember, I said at the beginning that I would like to take philosophy in its classical meaning, namely as a specific science. So that means we need to define it on the basis of this definition of science. So that means philosophy should have a subject matter, and it should have its method, and it should have theories that are accumulated in it, and it should have accumulation of knowledge. So this means that some of the theories in that science must be proved so that it will advance our knowledge of reality. Otherwise, why should we study philosophy? So this is the significant thing. Okay, so this is, remember the fifth one, these are the four characteristics. The fourth one is the name. The name is already given, philosophy. So no need to mention it. Now, in that case, if we apply this, we would like to ask the question, what is the subject matter of philosophy? This is perhaps one of the most controversial issues. And that is what I'm going to answer this. I will be a bit, courageous here to give an answer. And I claim that when we study, of course, there are many, innumerable issues discussed in philosophy, all of which are, of course, subject matter, but you cannot count all of them. Remember, I said we should come up with a concept that embraces all of those issues. So if you study history of philosophy, you will see that At the beginning, of course, by the time of Aristotle, philosophers, of course, had a certain approach to study discrete problems. One problem there, but later on, Aristotle brought all of those, under a conceptual unity, which now we call a system. At that time, he called it philosophia, or wisdom, indeed, wisdom. So he made up his system. So then after that, you study history of philosophy, you'll see that most philosophers are attempting either to construct a system, if they are able to do so, and if they feel the need for it, or they already have a system established which satisfies their need, and then they work within that system, try to solve the problems that are remained in it, or the problems that do not satisfy their curiosity, or their intellectual approach. As a result, they try to change those things. So this is the way it continues. Okay. So what about the method? The method, we say philosophical method. Most people understand, most philosophers, but it is not clear enough. So we can say discursive, argumentative, and so on. So this, depending on, of course, there may not be a specific method that is used universally by all philosophers. But the fact that there should be this discursive approach, you can see, that more or less they all utilize it. But when, for example, we go to mystical philosophers, they will say, intuition besides discursive. Discursive by itself is not sufficient, so they add certain things. So therefore, it has a method, and obviously it is full of theories. Philosophy is full of theories. The only thing we may argue, whether some of those theories are proved to be true or not. So this, of course, is a different issue, and I think that definitely it has. Some theories have been proved to be true in history, and we don't return to discuss those issues anymore. So in that case, the element assigned by our system of knowledge, naming philosophy. So let us give our definition of philosophy based on this, like the way we define the other sciences. Just like other sciences, it will have a subject matter which has already identified. Then we can define it based on its subject matter, as philosophy is the science which deals with systems and system-related problems. So now this is what I understand from philosophy. But very briefly, remember I said the subject matter is the system of philosophy. But what is a system? Very briefly, because if I spend too much time on this, I won't be able to go to the functions of philosophy. Actually, establishing a system is the most significant epistemological function of philosophy. Why? Because when scientists are working, or philosophers are working on certain issues, they need a mental framework within which they should discuss those issues. And it is this system that gives them the mental framework. So remember, at the beginning, I said that when we take science in general, it studies something in general, and depending on the classification of being, the philosopher organizes his sciences accordingly. And for example, here, then at the end, if we take being in the material sense, either organic or inorganic, But you see, as I said, in Islamic philosophy especially, they also talk about being that is in the transcendent realm. So they usually integrate that into philosophy, although this is, properly speaking, is really not a science, because its knowledge primarily comes from revealed sources. So knowledge is given, in other words. But Muslim philosophers, they try to integrate that also into the general body of their philosophical systems. That is why I needed to mention it here very briefly. Otherwise, most philosophical systems, they are organized like above. And you see, if you want, for example, to change, you say, well, I want to bring chemistry from here above physics. You cannot do that, because you see, the philosopher has developed his system in such a way that it must start from physics, not from chemistry, or not from astronomy or any other. You cannot change its place. So, but supposing that, of course, this is just as an example, I made this as an example. It's possible that some philosophers will start their system, say, from mineralogy. So that means they should, but he should argue for it. He should try to prove it discursively. Why he should, the system must start from mineralogy, and so on. So therefore, it depends, which science comes first, which one comes after that, and so on. Let me mention simply, Ibn Sina's system. Ibn Sina is a genius philosopher, actually, and he, in a general, he divided his system into three, usually logic, physics, metaphysics. So he usually organized like that. But you see, in this organization, actually, his system, he argues that his system must start from theology, namely from metaphysics. The physics should come afterwards. But you see, this has become a standard procedure after Andronikos, organized Aristotle's corpus in this way, because, the study of metaphysics is too difficult, and therefore, if it comes right after logic, students will have problems. That is why they always put physics as second, and then metaphysics third. So he gives his justification for this. But of course, the true system is logic, metaphysics, and then physics. And then, of course, the sub-branches. So it continues in that way. Biology, psychology, ethics, and so on, all they are put under their proper places within the system. So this is then the system. So the systems, I would like to give certain philosophers who defend the same idea. For example, Whitehead in the West, he represents also philosophy as the endeavor to frame a coherent, logical, necessary system of general ideas in terms of which every element of our experience can be interpreted. And in fact, in the continuation of his explanation, he says that this is the very idea of civilization, and therefore philosophy, in this sense, represents civilization. And in fact, he thinks if we consider philosophy in this sense, it is the most significant of all sciences. So I'm not saying this. So you can check, Whitehead clearly says this. And then here, another Sidgwick states that it is the primary aim of philosophy to unify completely, bring into clear coherence all departments of rational thought. All departments of rational thought, you can drop it, put sciences instead. I don't think he would object this. So that is the way I interpret. That's what he means. Of course, one of the most significant philosophers in the West, Immanuel Kant, he also says the same thing. Every doctrine, if it is to be a system, a whole of cognition, ordered according to principles, is called science. The doctrine of nature might better be divided into the historical doctrine of nature, which contains nothing but the systematically ordered facts regarding natural things and natural science. Now, natural science would in turn be natural science, either properly or improperly so-called. The first would treat its object wholly according to a priori principles, and the second according to laws of experience. Again, you can see. So, in a sense, Kant is saying that each science by itself is a system, as well as taken to, as a whole, all sciences, they might make up a complete, total system. And total system actually is the study of philosophy. So that is the proper subject matter of philosophy. Just some more quotations. I won't read all of them. Please check. This is something very important by Kant, Metaphysical Foundations of Natural Science. And then I will quote his famous book, Critique of Pure Reason. He says that human reason is by nature architectonic. That is to say, it regards all our knowledge as belonging to a possible system. Systematic unity is indispensable to reason. By an architectonic, I understand the art of constructing systems. Very important. As systematic unity is what first raises ordinary knowledge to the rank of science, that is, makes a system out of a mere aggregate of knowledge. Architectonic is a doctrine of the scientific in our knowledge. So by a system, I understand the unity or the manifold modes of knowledge under one idea. Perfect explanation. So this idea is the concept provided by reason. The whole is thus an organized unity and not an aggregate. It may grow from within, but not by external addition. It is thus like an animal body, the growth of which is not by the addition of a new member, but by rendering of each member without change of proportion, stronger and more effective for its purposes. So I can give more and more examples. Hegel, for example, another one. They are defending, that systems are indispensable. In fact, especially today, maybe in the past, it will be possible to do scientific activities without any system, but today it's not possible. You need a framework. You need a mental philosophical framework that is provided by sciences, so that you can do your scientific activities. Okay, that is so far the epistemological function. Very briefly, I would like to discuss, just this is the last, my last slide, the social function of philosophy that we need to elaborate actually. The social function of philosophy is geared towards civilizations. Now, this is achieved through transparent worldviews that establish civilizations and scientific traditions. Other worldviews cannot achieve this. Now, here, actually, I try to come up with resemblances between systems and worldviews. Okay, just as world systems function or perform an epistemological function, for the development or progress of sciences and scientific activities, in the same way, worldview, performing the same function with regard to civilizations. Okay, so this is very much important to establish such a worldview. Why? Because transparent worldview is the worldview in which concepts in the minds of an individual are transparent to him or her. Namely, the person who has transparent worldview knows the purpose of life and many significant questions that concerns us, like where am I coming from, where am I going to, what is the meaning of life, why the truth is important, what is the meaning of reality, so many other questions. So all these questions, so a worldview, it is the obviously all these questions are discussed in philosophy. So if philosophy, does not provide this to the society, how are we going to use in our educational system, so that we can instill this kind of transparent worldview into the minds of our students? When I say this in some of my seminars, I came up with an objection. They said, "Well, are you doing a social engineering?" I am not, because philosophy cannot do that. The spirit of philosophy is critique, and critical attitude. So how can you do this? So that means when this kind of worldview, one of the most critical, characteristic of a transparent worldview is its critical attitude. So and therefore students will always question. So questioning is, in the nature of transparent worldviews. So as a result, how is this achieved? Again, with the help of philosophy, which provides a good educational system within the society, and this helps, the spread of knowledge evenly throughout the whole society. Now, this spread of knowledge is, I usually say, knowledge is, when considered in society, it resembles, an organic living being, because it travels actually. Knowledge travels from mind to another mind. Okay, so and minds can capture this immediately, and through this network of traveling of knowledge, a mechanism is established, which I call knowledge mechanism within the society. As a result, knowledge that is generated at the higher levels of sciences and philosophy, including all social and human sciences, gradually from there it goes down to the complete society. Now this from above to to below, I consider to be at 3 levels. The first abstract level is the scientific one. The scholars produce this technical knowledge, and scientists, philosophers are not concerned, with this, let me go and start teach everybody, in the villages, on the field, so people can learn philosophy. This is not possible. They are not concerned with that. And in fact, if they try to do that, they will lose time and they won't be able to do their own jobs. So who are going to do this? Intermediary scientists. Intermediary scientists, I call them intellectuals. Intellectuals, through their works, intellectuals can be teachers, literary personalities, artists, architects, and so on. Now, these personalities, they are not like the scientists, but you see, because they are brought up by the scientists and philosophers, they are able to understand scientific and philosophical issues. But they are not concerned so much. They may be, but usually they are not concerned to find solutions for those problems. What they do, they convert them into more concrete ideas, and they express those in their works. So as a result, general people, can understand concrete ideas, but abstract ideas they cannot understand. For example, if somebody starts, talking about relativity theory to people, they will not understand it. But you see someone, again, like Stephen Hawking, when he wrote The History of Time, he concretized it. So as a result, people are able to understand it. Sometimes scientists are doing this. This is not the job of a scientist, actually. But somehow he has done it. Maybe he needed some more money because his book sells a lot. So he decided to do this job. Usually scientists are not supposed to do that, but he did it. So there are exceptions all the time. So as a result, the idea is concretized, and people are now able to understand what is relativity, things that are said in astrophysics, and so on. So the same thing with social and human sciences, including philosophy as well. So this I call concretization level. So this is achieved with the help of intellectuals. And intellectuals are those people who have transparent worldview, which I have just mentioned. And then finally, at the low level, mass dissemination of knowledge. And so therefore knowledge travels from the minds of the scholars and scientists and philosophers to the intellectuals, and from there through the knowledge mechanism throughout the whole society. So this knowledge mechanism is established by philosophy, and we can see this. You know, of course, the educational system, you need philosophy of education, right? In philosophy of education, many things should be clarified, you know, and when teachers, they start teaching science and, you know, scientific knowledge to students, they need to explain what is science, what is the meaning of science, why is it important, what is knowledge, what is truth, what is method. So these things are not studied in other sciences. These are the issues discussed in philosophy. So philosophy, in this way, you know, performs double function, actually. Number one, establishing the mechanism, and number two, within the mechanism also clarifying the concepts. So this is what I have tried to say briefly. I hope it is clear enough. And I probably finished my time also. Fadi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. This is really a very, very good and very important topic. I have a lot of questions. Let's start with, I would like to emphasize the functionality of philosophy and also like political theory. I was studying in Frankfurt political theory, and I was always asked by the people, why are you studying political theory? What do you want to do with it? It's like, because most of the Palestinians will be studying in Germany, for example, medicine or engineer, whatever topic related to science, but always people will suspecting, like, why are you studying political theory? And later when I really get to study and see like the Frankfurt school, etc., I saw how the scholar in the Frankfurt school, the first generation, especially because all of them, they are Jewish, they had to leave to America because of the Nazi in 1933. And after that, when the Nazi finished in Germany, they came back with the American, and they built the Republic of Germany. So when we see the political system in Germany, it was, some people will argue, directly or indirectly established by the contribution of Frankfurt School. So we can see here how a political theorist, for example, it's not just someone who's sitting and talking about dialectical reasoning, etc., or idea in Greek philosophy, but they contribute to the establishment and the construction of the political system in Germany and all of what we see today as a Republic of Germany. So that in my field, if we study, and also in philosophy, this is important. I have a lot of a question. Let's start with this. What is the difference between, like, when we say Islamic philosophy and Western philosophy? Because Taha Abdul Rahman, for example, you know him, the Moroccan philosopher, he wrote one of the book, it's called Su'al al-Akhlaq, the question of ethics. And he said, we as a Muslim, we have two main things to contribute to the Western or to the world philosophy. One is faith, because we have faith different than the other philosophy in the world. And the second is al-akhlaq, the ethics, the ethical system, which established on revealed religion. So with these two aspects, we can contribute to the philosophy. So let's start with Taha Abdul Rahman. What do you think? What is the difference between Muslim philosophy or Islamic philosophy and Western? And also how Muslim philosopher, like what is the contribution of the Muslim philosopher to the philosophy as a field of study?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I definitely agree with Taha Abdul Rahman. He expressed it very well. But in order to defend it, I would like to refer to some other characteristics of sciences also, which I did not discuss actually in my presentation. This is, a debate among the philosophers, and I believe scientists also. They are saying that, science is science, and it is the same everywhere, in every culture, in every civilization. Well, I can give just one example to show that this is wrong. Take the science of fiqh, for example, in Islamic civilization. Do they have this in Western civilization? See, they don't. So that means, there are certain aspects of science which is relative. And at the same time, again, Taha Abdurrahman gave a very good example here, philosophy. Well, philosophy is not philosophy in Islamic civilization and not the same in Western civilization. It is different. It is different, but it has similarities also. That means it has universal aspects, it has relative aspects, and we must always consider this. So science is not universal in the absolute sense. It is universal relatively. So this is very important. It's impossible for all human beings to agree, on a certain thing. This is too difficult. In physical sciences, it's not like that. Because you see, in physical sciences, when you say, for example, the water freezes at 0 degree, if anybody doesn't believe in this, you can just bring him and show, and then he can observe gradually the water is freezing. And then he cannot deny it. If he still denies it, that means he's stubborn or ignorant. This is something else. But you see, in philosophy, this is not possible. You cannot do that. How are you going to show the truth to him? So as a result, when we accept this approach, the relative aspect and the universal aspect of sciences, we will understand that, Taha Abdurrahman is correct. We can help each other. We can cooperate. Usually I give this example, we get confused. The universal aspect of science comes from two things, the subject and the object. Now, when I say subject, of course, that is we as human beings. And I think, as far as I know, most philosophers would agree with me that human knowledge system is the same everywhere. Just as human digestive system is universal everywhere. It is the same. So if you see, otherwise, when I go to Germany, if I get sick, I won't be able to go to a German doctor. So that means it is universal. And knowledge system is the same. So namely, when we try to understand certain thing, the faculties that I use function in the same way as any other human being. Now, this is one thing that makes it universal. The second, coming from the object side, the objects are also the same. Tree is tree, stone is stone, mountain is mountain, stars are stars, so these don't change also. So this is another thing. But besides this, although this is the same, unfortunately, when we come up with theories and conclusions as a result of our investigation, they don't come out the same. There are differences in that way. I usually give this example. See, just as I mentioned, human digestive system is universal, the same everywhere. But you see, the culinary art is not the same. Every nation, every civilization has different culture, different kitchen culture, right? So that means its manifestation is not the same, but there are similarities, of course. There are many dishes that are either the same or very similar. And if I like a Russian dish, for example, I get the menu and then I learn how to cook it, and then I cook and I eat it. So this is the same thing. So that means you can cooperate. We can cooperate, and as much as we agree on the conclusions, this will be much better and will help our cooperation. Now, after I answer this, I would like to make a remark to your experience, that when they say, why are you studying political theory? and especially, in the countries, in the developing countries, let us say, as they use in economics, they will ask these questions because they don't consider, the significance of these abstract sciences, let us say. I experienced in a different way. The problem is this. They invited me. They said, okay, this is good. You emphasized that we need philosophy education. This is important for us. Please come and explain to us so that we can see if we can organize our educational system in accordance with your philosophy of education. When I talk and try to explain and finish, they ask questions and so on. At the end, some of the bureaucrats, they come and they tell me, they say, look, professor, we asked you to give us, a sort of philosophy so we can apply, but you explained so abstract way, we don't understand anything. How are we going to apply this? You see, and they also try to argue with me that, your philosophy is not applicable. And I tell them, this is true. At least that far you understood very well. But there is one thing that you don't understand is that, this philosophy, its approach is too abstract. You need another person, another intellectual. Remember I said the intermediary personalities. So I would like to call them technocrats in this case, because you see, they want to apply it to the educational system. They should have technocrats who understand my philosophy, and they turn it into a blueprint work so that they can apply it. So philosophical theories cannot apply it directly. There could be exceptions. I'm not saying in the absolute sense, maybe some of them would be applicable directly, but mostly you cannot apply them directly. So that means you need an intermediary theory, break it down, okay, from its abstractness and convert into a blueprint. So that is also slightly abstract. It is not completely, concrete, but at least now bureaucrats will be able to understand that, and they know what to do afterwards. This is lacking, in the developing countries, these technocrat people. So this problem, that is why, like political theory you are discussing, how can you have a political system without a political theory? So that means you need political technocrats to convert your theory into an applicable blueprint, so that, just like the architecture, right? When an architect, for example, has in his mind, conception of space, time, significance of environment, beauty, art, and so on. See, all these things are abstract. But you see, if he tries to apply it to his building, he cannot apply it. These are inapplicable. He needs to convert them. So therefore he starts drawing. So that is what they call blueprint, right? In architecture. So this is similar to that. So I think if we emphasize this aspect, maybe the functions of philosophy and other abstract sciences will become clear.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much. Let's move now to more question related to Islam and philosophy also. We have this idea that philosophy is something bad, even it's like something un-Islamic. And when we are talking about he is a philosopher, that means he is like someone who usually to be against Islam or Muslim idea, or who is like doesn't recognize Quran to be as a holy book, etc. We have this in the Arab world, like people, they don't see philosophy as something really good. Maybe because we have also some people who are like philosopher or trying to be presenting themselves as a philosopher who are really anti-religion. So what is the, because even when I, on the personal level, this is what I was like witnessing when I was living in Palestine, for example. And later, when I start to study like classical Muslim thinker, and then I found like someone like Ar-Raghib al-Asfahani. He's a great philosopher. He's even the professor of Ghazali, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. You find really a big Muslim scholars who are indeed philosophers. So, but usually we don't come to cross this. So why we have this in the Muslim world? Like philosophy is something bad, and to be like philosopher that means to be denying religion, etc. And how can we also change this aspect, or change this view that philosophy is not necessarily to be against religion?
Yes, this is a question that we face quite a lot. Also, I will give an analogy which clarify this point. As I mentioned earlier, we have many other sciences, but among them, maybe because medical science is geared more towards application, and since we need it a lot in everyday life, I will give my example from medicine. Now, if you ask any person in society and say, is medical science, is it good or bad? I don't think anyone will say it is bad. Everyone will say it's good because we need it. When I get sick, where am I going to? I have to go to a doctor. But if the person goes to a doctor and then the doctor prescribes something wrong and his illness gets severe, is he going to say medical science is bad? Look what happened to me. Or is he going to say this doctor is bad? You see, this is the same thing. It is not philosophy that is bad, actually. It depends how the philosopher is utilizing that. So it is the philosopher that comes up with those ideas. Philosophy does not lead you to those ideas. So the way you develop it, whatever you try to do. So this is the same thing, that Muslims should be able to understand that, philosophy is very useful, as I have tried to mention. And in fact, it's a type of knowledge. And as you know, in Islam, knowledge is always good. It is khair, and not only khair, it is khairun mahdun, right? Pure goodness, summum bonum in Latin, as they translated from Arabic into Latin. So, therefore, philosophy in itself, it is good. But there are philosophers who come up with certain ideas that are against Islam, there is only one difference, though, between a doctor who prescribed the wrong medicine and a philosopher who developed a theory that is really detrimental to the society, very dangerous, and against religion. And in fact, certain philosophers, this you cannot avoid. This is human beings. They make it like, their life purpose to reject religion and develop theories to prove that the religion is wrong. You cannot avoid this. So this is possible. But the problem is, the reaction against the bad doctor is less than the reaction against the philosopher, because philosopher is attacking the religion. And as you know, in religion, it is more emotional. So because of this, they begin to attack philosophy. Look what philosophy is doing. This is a wrong attitude that must be corrected. We should criticize the philosopher, not philosophy. So this is extremely important. I can give one example, if we have time, from our Mashai philosophers. As you know, there is a reaction against the Mashai philosophers. But if you investigate what they had done, actually, you notice that they are very good Muslims, in fact, including, Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi. Of course, they made mistakes. This is possible, in sciences, mistakes are allowed. You always make science mistakes. So why do I say they are good Muslims? Because they struggled to, they knew their society needs these sciences, Greek philosophical sciences. They must bring them because Muslims need these. And in fact, as you know, Al-Ghazali also argues in Al-Munqidh, right, that these are useful. Muslims must study, especially logic. And in later history, many Muslim mutakallim, even Al-Ghazali, including him, they say that it is fardu ayn, fardu kifaya, sorry, for Muslims to study logic and physics. These are philosophical sciences, so they argue for that. So because of this, starting from Al-Kindi onwards, Muslim Mashai, Aristotelian philosophers, they thought that these are useful, so we should bring. But when they brought, they noticed that there are many things in these that are against Islam. For example, you take Aristotle's physics. They took physics. They said this is good, and they tried to see the mistakes in physics, their theories. They tried to modify those. But when they came to Aristotle's theology, they noticed that it is completely against Islam. Completely. So in his theology, I think it is book 12, if I am not mistaken, that talks about God and God's nature, which is not proper word to use in Islam, as you know. But you see, these philosophers, they didn't have any revealed religion, so they are utilizing such terminology. So they thought this completely against, they dropped it. They didn't take it. Okay, so what did they do instead? You see, because in Aristotelian theology, there is no idea of creation, because the universe is eternal. It is always there. But the Quran says the universe is created. So they said they need a theory to explain creation. And they found that theory in Plotinus. And they brought it and they said, oh, this is the true Aristotelian theology. That's what they thought. And they brought that also, and they referred to that. And then they said, okay, let's take this. And as you know, they translated that as Uthulugia Aristotelis. At the beginning, we didn't have Arabic word for theology, because actually, if they reasoned out, at that time, they would have realized that if there is no term in Arabic, that means in Islam, theology is not a science, and therefore it should not be included among these sciences. But this is a big mistake, of course. They didn't realize. Al-Ghazali realized this. For the first time, he said, this is not theology, this is not a science. So, but they didn't realize, and they brought. But later on, Ibn Sina invented a term for it, ilahiyat, as you know. So he called it ilahiyat. Ilahiyat means theology in Islamic sense. And they also used the Greek word. They translated into Arabic, mabada tabi'a. That was also utilized. So what was in Plotinus's theory? Emanation. So they came up with this theory again, that emanation, God created the universe through emanation. But again, you cannot say that, they went outside of Islam because they are defending emanation. You have to say that their theory is wrong. So this is important, in sciences, this is the way we should argue. But unfortunately, at the beginning, Muslims did not develop this attitude. That is why they started accusing them with many different names. But, when you study their books, you will notice many things they throw out from Aristotle, from other Greek philosophers. Many terms they Islamized. They brought it into the, proper sphere of the Quran. So, what we should do, we should be very careful today in that case. Just as a scientist in physics makes a mistake, a philosopher will definitely make a mistake also. So we should not accuse philosophy, then we should start correcting the philosopher. This is the attitude that we should have.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like also to ask you about the idea of worldview or Weltanschauung, which we know from the German language, because even in one of your contributions, I read how we form or how can we construct a kind of worldview, and the Muslim they should have a different worldview than the Western in many different aspects. And I remember in one of your contributions, you talk about three levels, the ulama and the educated people and then the normal people. So I would like you please elaborate on how we construct worldview and what is like unique about the Muslim worldview in compared to the Western worldview, because this is also related something related to politics, to daily life of the politics. For example, in the Arab Spring, or what we call the Arab Spring, I once read in 2011, I think, or something like this, one article by a journalist who was saying at that time the Arab Spring will not be succeed. And I was looking at the argument. He was saying because there is no philosopher behind all of this, or political theorist. And later, when I advance, and then I always come back to his article and remember his article. By the way, the journalist, his name was Sam bin Jiddo, and he's like a normal journalist. I don't know. He got to this very deep idea that the Arab Revolution will not be success in the Arab world because we don't have worldview. Because, for example, if you ask the people, they will be in Egypt, we need freedom, but ask 10 people, what do you mean by freedom? 10 different answers. But in compared, for example, to Marxist or whatever in communist, they will have one answer. So having this worldview as one will contribute, the people will have like a kind of political system, which is, you talk about the importance of like establishing a system, which is coming through the worldview. So let us know, please, how can we contribute, how can we have this worldview, who are the people who are building this worldview, because also you talk about ulama, who are the ulama who can contribute to this. Thank you.
Yes, this is very important. If you remember, at one point I mentioned that philosophical systems resemble worldviews. You see, but you see, the significance of worldview is that anything that we do, in society, we do according to our worldview. For example, if a person, does not have a strong conception of lying and the moral implications of lying in his worldview, that means in everyday life, he can easily lie. So, and you can consider this to all other moral actions. So anything that we do. Now, this is the moral side. But what about sciences? Suppose, consider a person that does not have a strong concept of knowledge, truth, reality, method in his mind. Can he ever engage himself in scientific activities? Obviously not. So that means certain structures must develop in his mind, which will be utilized in his scientific activities. So this is very important. And this is the function of worldview in scientific activities also. But when we relate this to philosophy, it is philosophy which sophisticates the worldviews. So again, this is another epistemological as well as social function of philosophy. So this is why it is very important. But you see, I mentioned, remember, transparent worldviews. So there are also worldviews that are not transparent. We can call them, in a sense, natural worldviews. This is a term which I don't like it, but the Arabic word fatri is much better in this sense. Fatri worldview, in other words. But in English, people will not perhaps understand when I say fatri. What do I mean by this? Any human being, as he grows up in the society, there will definitely be knowledge accumulation in his mind. Now, if this accumulation of knowledge is not done in a systematic way and in a clear way in the mind of the person, certain ideas will not acquire that transparency. It will not come to that transparent level. So when we consider the early Muslim community, for example, in Mecca and Medina, the Quran, through the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ, installed in their mind a very clear worldview. Consider these people, all the companions before Islam, they were not concerned with many moral actions. They were not concerned with knowledge. But after Islam, you see, they become so dynamic, incredibly dynamic, the way it was taught to them, the strength, the dynamism that is given to them, they never stay. Because you see the Prophet ﷺ, he told them, if your 2 days are equal, you are in loss, big loss. So everybody said, what have I done today so that I am not at loss? So they are struggling for this. Why? Because their worldview changed. It became transparent. And the emphasis given for knowledge, so they run after knowledge, try to learn more and more. Not only that, but turning what they have learned into an action. So that means they learn and they live in accordance with that knowledge, whatever they have learned. So this is the significance of worldview. Later on, you see, because of this, it gradually developed until the end of the 2nd century. Muslims came up with sciences. So I claim that although at the beginning, before Islam, their worldview was natural. With the coming of Islam, it became transparent worldview. But after the 2nd century, it turned into a scientific worldview. So then Muslims, they started teaching this in a scientific manner. So because of that, actually, Islamic civilization achieved, that scientific level. So I always claim that Islamic civilization is a scientific civilization. It's a civilization based on knowledge. And this is attested by many others, in fact, non-Muslims. The most important one is Rosenthal. Usually I mention this, right, in his work, the Knowledge Triumphant. In that book, he clearly shows that, Islamic civilization is based on knowledge. So this is what I tried to explain. But of course, the nature of worldviews are important. That is a quite long discussion, because I claim that, worldviews are made up of certain structures, and each structures are network of concepts. And it is through those concepts that we get insight, outlook towards certain things, even in sciences, like, knowledge structure, human structure, value structure. These are very important structures within the worldview. When they come all together, it gives a scientific outlook to the person. So, this is a subject that we need to study in detail in the philosophical way, so we can see this. The question concerning the ulama, I mentioned at the beginning that in the West, they came up with a concept, what they call scientific community. And Islamic civilization already had this all the way from the beginning. In fact, in the 1st century, even before sciences emerged, they had, alim means scientist, actually. We don't have such a distinction, we don't say, scholar of religion, scholar of physics. There is no such distinction. And the striking characteristic is that I usually give this example, and it's very, very striking. I ask my students, I say, do you know Ibn Shatir, or do you know Ibn al-Haytham, Ibn Sina, and Zahrawi, right? They say, yes, we know, these are scientists. I say, what do you think, what kind of education they had, from elementary school onwards until they finished the madrasa, their higher education? It is confusing, because they say, well, Zahrawi is a medical scientist, so he must be, studying biology, all these things. I say, okay, let's consider Imam Shafi'i. okay, and then Al-Ghazali and Junaid Baghdadi, such very backgrounds are quite different, right? Abu Hanifa, these scholars, when you see these scholars, what kind of education they had, they say, well, most probably religion, they studied religion, the Quran and Hadith. I say no. All of these scholars had exactly the same type of education. Ibn Sina had the same education as Abu Hanifa. They both started memorizing the Quran. I mean, you look, Ibn Sina, he himself tells, he has a good, this is good that he wrote his biography. He says, I started with Hifz, memorizing the Quran, and I finished it when I was 10 years old. And he says, in early life, what he studied, tafsir, the adab, books, literature, and so on and so forth, it's all the same. The only difference is this, that there are certain sciences that was not developed at the time of Abu Hanifa, so obviously he couldn't study those, but at the time, because he came almost 200 years, right? So therefore, Ibn Sina had a better chance to study those sciences. And in later periods also, it is the same. But throughout their education, they had no such distinction. So, you are going to be a doctor, so don't study religion, just study medicine and biology. They had no such thing. So this whole approach, this is very important. So as a result, an alim means a scientist at the same time. So the term ulama, because of this, I argue that we should translate as scientific community into English so that they don't misunderstand. But you see, unfortunately, you might say, well, you look today in the Muslim world, people don't understand it like that. When you go to the Arab world, why don't they say ustaz? They say doctor. How are you, doctor? Why do they say like that? In our tradition, we say ustaz. So all the way from the beginning. So alim, faqih, these things, they are our technical terms, and sometimes they are not translatable. Maybe ulama may not mean exactly scientific community, but it comes closest to that meaning. So I think this is what I was trying to explain with respect to this term.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one question also, which asks how Keynes said in one of his latest books that we can have a theory that unifies, if we can have a theory that unified the four forces in the world, gravity, electromagnetic forces, nuclear forces, and weak nuclear forces, if we have such as a theory, then we don't need to have God. Why would you not agree with him?
Okay, is the question saying that when all these theories are combined together, then they explain everything and therefore doesn't leave a room for the idea of God?
Yes.
Is that the question?
I think yes. So if we have all of these four elements together, unified in one unified theory, so then we don't need God.
Yes, this actually a very big mistake, very big mistake, because this question neglects the nature of all those electromagnetic theories or the objects, let us say, that manifest these characteristics, and then their results, you need to match them to each other. No matter how many theories you combine together, it will never lead to this universe. Why? Because those theories that scientists are bringing together are just theories in our mind. They don't function in the reality. And plus, they have no consciousness. You see, what you need to understand is that the result and whatever brings that result, you have to look. I would like to give this example. No matter how many theories you combine and bring together, it's impossible, to lead to a rational explanation of the result. Why? Because, you see, the result is extremely complicated, and it shows reasoning, and it shows consciousness, it shows will, it shows power. So then if the theories who lead to that result, you try to look at those. Do they have this consciousness, will, power, wisdom, planning? None of these you can find in those theories. Moreover, theories are in our mind. They are not in reality. They don't exist out there. Out there, all is happening is the things that just continue in front of us. David Hume gives a good example for this, although of course he reaches different results. But you see, he says, for example, when we look at fire burning the wood, I observe the fire, I observe the wood burning, and at the end I observe that there is ashes. But then I come up with this conclusion, and I say that fire necessarily burns. Where did I see necessity? I just saw those three things, the phenomenon, burning, right? Fire, wood burning, and the ashes. Where is the necessity? Necessity is in my mind. So theories are just like that. When we observe, we see certain thing and we try to explain it. That explanation is in our mind. It's not over there. So over there, the result. So you have to look. Is the fire is able to bring out the ashes at the end? So if whatever is brought out at the end is very conscious, it's the result of knowledge, wisdom, planning, consciousness, will. You see so many things. I can count only this, maybe infinite, in fact. I mean, when we look in the universe, we can see everything, we explain, and we come to a point, we say, well, that's it, that much I can explain. In fact, the things that we have explained compared to things that we have not explained are immense. They're incomparable, beyond imagination. So these things, scientists usually make a very big mistake here. And I think our friends should be very careful. Science is able to explain certain things, but up to a certain point, and after that, it's impossible. So therefore, we need to question, and this is also questioning, part of the questioning. Always we should try to see, the explanation you provide simply analyzes the phenomenon, but it doesn't say, where the phenomenon is coming from. At the end of the things that you see. So always, whatever you give, any explanation that you provide, you will always miss one thing. You can never see. You can always say, well, there is something. Well, there is something. Okay, up to this point. So you see there, always, that means a room is left for God. So this is, at least this is my conviction. I don't know if this will be satisfying for our friend or not, but this is the way I understand it. This problem, of course, is very much related not only to theories, the general, what do they call this? General relativity theory, I guess, and they think they have explained and, well, finished. But as the science goes further and further, they realize that, well, we need to change our mind. This Stephen Hawking, remember, throughout all of his life, he claimed that we are on the verge of discovering that there is no God. At certain points, he said we are on the verge of discovering that there is God, but he just continued like that. He never came to any conclusion. So if you are not reaching a conclusion, the conclusion is God. That is the clear idea that the Quran really explains this very well.
We still have a lot of the question. I was like, I don't know what to do, but I will ask some of them, and then you manage with your last 5 minutes. The first, what is the difference between thinking by the qalb and the thinking by aql? So thinking through the intellect and thinking through our heart. Also, there is a question about the relationship between tasawwuf and philosophy, because a lot of Muslim philosophers, they have a traditional somehow orientation or relation to Sufism, even like Taha Abdul Rahman in the modern time, or Ghazali in the classical text. Also, we have a question about Attas, the Islamization of knowledge. What do you think about his project? Is his project like contributing to the Muslim philosophy, etc.? Also, we have a question about how the student, the Muslim student, can contribute to the philosophy. Also, how can we contribute? Like, what is the focus that we should focus on them, or the element that we should focus on them for the future research in philosophy? So you have 5 minutes. You can.
Yeah. Very briefly. Too many questions. I will combine all of them into what I understand from the ontology of the Quran. This will probably give a very general answer to all of these questions. In this ontology, there are verses in the Quran mentioned many times. In fact, samawat wal ard wa ma baynahuma. This phrase, just take this phrase. It in many contexts it is repeated. I usually relate this to another verse which is also repeated at least 13 times I counted. Alimul ghaibi wa shahada. This everybody knows already, because this ghaib shahada distinction is very clear. When we study philosophy, obviously the Quran is not a philosophy book, but as Muslims, we take the Quran as guidance, not only in life, but in our scientific works also. We can take it. So don't take them as scientific theories. This is wrong, because the Quran, again, is not a book of science. It's neither a book of science nor a book of philosophy. But definitely there are things that are related to them, and therefore we should utilize it. So in philosophy, we don't use the term ghaib. We use the transcendent realm. And we don't use the word shahada, so we convert them into the philosophical concepts. So when we do that, the other verse that says also in between. So from this we need to, of course, we have to learn the ontology, the ontology of reality and so on very well. So by studying philosophy, I understand this Quranic ontology as these realms are not separated from each other, as with clear, sharp distinctions. They are integrated. They are together all the time. So therefore, from the side of the ghaib, transcendent realm, there is a stretch all the way to reaching to the corporeal realm, which is called shahada. So all the things in between show different shades of reality. So each shade of reality corresponds to certain faculties in us. Certain faculties, of course, the faculty that is very close that we utilize in everyday sense perception. So in anything concrete, we usually don't so much, argue about. But when we get away from it, as we reach to the other side, it becomes more and more subjective. So therefore, we need to evaluate this ontology on the basis of objectivity and subjectivity also. But of course, in the past, especially, with the rise of positivism and certain other philosophical movements, they always try to dismiss subjectivity as, irrelevant. But nowadays, it becomes, more acceptable in philosophy that subjectivity has its own reality, and we should try to understand it and what it is meant. So this qalb and aql refers to that, actually. So when we are in the realm of the corporeal, the aql is more active, and as we move to the other side, it will become less, and then more the qalb side will take over, reaching to the other side. We need to prove this, of course, we can give many examples, but because of the shortage of the time, I will give this. A lot of times everybody has this kind of experience, and this experience is given to you to show the reality of the subjectivity also. That when you think about certain thing, you cannot find any answer, and at one point you say, I found it, so it occurred to you. So this shows that the reasoning does not come about only by akal, by the intellect. So there are other faculties in us. Muslims evaluated these faculties quite a lot, and this you don't find in Western epistemology. Again, one difference, as you know, in Islamic epistemology we use also the term lataif. Lataif means subtle faculties that belong to the qalb. So qalb, heart, is the center of those faculties, and they evaluated this a lot. Of course, we cannot go into many details. This is combining philosophy with tasawwuf. So tasawwuf, this is something maybe unfortunate. We can criticize tasawwuf in this respect, or tasawwuf philosophers. They concentrate too much on this subjective side, whereas they should try to combine both. They should try to combine. So that means they need to bring a bit philosophy also into the picture, so that they can rationalize, as much as possible. It's not completely possible, but as much as possible. Of course, there is an area where rationalization is never possible. It is totally impossible. That we should realize this also. So I hope this will be a very general, brief answer, but that's all I can say.
Thank you very much for this excellent talk. We enjoyed so much. This was Professor Professor Alparslan Ashek from University of Üsküdar and University of Ibn Khaldun with us. Tomorrow we will continue our lecture, so you can follow us in this. We will have also Professor from Ibn Khaldun University, Hiba Raouf Azzat, and she will be having a talk at the same time through the same link, and you can always follow us through the social media. Thank you very much for watching us, following us, and I'm sorry if we could not come to so many questions, because we get a lot of questions today. So hopefully in the next time we will have more time to speak with our Hujjah. And thank you very much, and see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Salam.